Richard Linklater's new film Nouvelle Vague tells the story of Jean-Luc Godard as he begins to shoot his debut feature film Breathless during the beginning of the French New Wave. Breathless is commonly hailed as one of the most influential films ever made due to its refreshing attitude in 1960 to tear apart conventional filmmaking by ripping up the rule book and introducing jump cuts, handheld camera work, and the use of natural light, as opposed to big French productions at the time that used artificial light, very expensive budgets. This was an attitude that rejected that approach to filmmaking, but not so much because of style. From what I understand, it's more to do with a lack of funding that Godard had at the time. But nonetheless, the philosophy and spirit of Godard's approach to making Breathless is what made it so influential. That approach to filmmaking ended up being much more interesting than Breathless, the finished product that we ended up with. While satisfying to watch, it isn't a film I deeply admire or would consider one of my favourites or even feature in any of my best of all time lists. I wouldn't consider myself a fan of Godard's work. I found Alphaville one of the most tedious films of all time to watch, and while I admire elements of Weekend, I struggle to admire any of his works as a whole piece. That being said, I haven't seen every Godard film, so I might find myself backtracking that statement in the future if I come across one of his works that I happen to think is brilliant. Now, some of you may share the same feelings as me towards Godard or Breathless, and some of you may have not engaged with his work at all, so understandably there may be a lack of appetite to go give Nouvelle Vague a go. But I'd say this: if you're a cinephile and have a deep passion for cinema, then you should go see this film despite your lack of interest surrounding the original 1960 work or the overall works of its director. Why? Well, because it's a love letter to a significant part of film history where the French New Wave emerged onto the scene, which is no doubt of interest if you have an interest in cinema. The dramatisation of this moment offers multiple moments where a smile will appear on your face, if you're familiar with the movement, that is. The film features plenty of figures from the movement, including Francois Truffaut, Claude Chabrol, Jean-Pierre Melville and Agnes Varda, and many more. And there's an extremely charming moment when Godard and his crew stumble into Robert Bresson in the middle of a production of Pickpocket. But it's not just the charm of seeing historical cinematic figures played by other actors in the film, but also the conversations that Jean-Luc Godard has with his friends and colleagues on the creative process and art. It's particularly interesting when he talks about the role that fear and terror play between the artist and the work he or she wishes to create. If you consider yourself an artist, you will find the conversations that take place in Nouvelle Vague intellectually stimulating, even if you don't have that deep interest in the French New Wave movement or Godard himself. Guillaume Marbeck plays Godard, and Zoe Deutsch plays Jean Seberg, and Aubrey Dulin plays Jean-Paul Belmondo. Each of these actors truly take on the life of the historical figures that they're playing here, and they look extremely alike. The casting is very competent in this film. The film is shot in black and white in a 4:3 ratio. The visual style is weaved directly into that period of time the film explores. If there's one thing I'd criticise about this film, it would be that it doesn't command your full attention. You're not deeply immersed into every moment, and that's because you find yourself getting lost in the nostalgia and you begin to contemplate on the attitudes ideas and themes present within the story, and it provokes your own mind to wander during it, but only if you have that deep interest in art, cinema, and filmmaking. Who would have thought that a film about the making of Breathless would end up being superior to the work itself? It just shows that sometimes the story behind the making of a film can be much more interesting than the artwork the filmmaker presents to the audience. It is fascinating to contemplate what other stories occur behind the camera that we haven't had the pleasure of observing. And while them films exist, like Nouvelle Vague, it wouldn't be a bad thing if we were rewarded with more of these stories in cinema. If not to entertain, then certainly to inspire.